In this video I wanted to talk about religion and how it actually is used to commit these existential crimes that the creator of this dimension is committing with this dimension. That you can find tons of websites and comment sections, Reddit posts, and you can find countless things on the internet arguing the different contradictions and the things that don't make sense and all of these different things, and so I'm not going to get into that. What I'm going to get into is the fact that religion, which is an attempt to explain existence itself, that this is used by the person who's committing these existential crimes in order to pervert existence, to commit crimes of existence. And so now, there are four major religions in the world: Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, in that order, I believe. And I have extensive experience with Christianity and Hinduism. I don't have as much with Islam. I do have, because I studied Eastern religion, I have studied Buddhism, maybe about as much as Hinduism, maybe a little less. But they're kind of, to some people, they're kind of interchangeable. There are some Hindu beliefs, there are beliefs of some Hindus and some branches of Hinduism, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But I want to start with Christianity, just because that's what I have the most experience with. I was raised Christian, non-denominational. My dad's side of the family is Mormon, LDS, Latter-day Saints, and I grew up in an area that was predominantly Mormon. And so they're a branch of Christianity. Some Christians, like my mother, says they're not, but that's a different story. I won't get into that. But I'll just cover Christianity in general. It has a bunch of branches, but they all stem from the same thing. And so you can talk about the central tenets of Christianity that are in the Bible in order to address kind of what I'm trying to address here. I'm not really trying to disprove anything. I'm trying to prove that these beliefs about existence have been either corrupted by or straight up fabricated by the person that is using this dimension to commit these existential crimes. And so if you look at any of these religions in context, that's basically what I'm trying to talk about here. The context of someone created this dimension in order to commit existential crimes against people. He traps someone in a physical body, and he does terrible things to your soul through it. He causes you to suffer. He poisons you. He pollutes you. He does all of these different things. Okay, and so Christianity kind of tries to describe this in such a way that says, oh, well, that's not God, that's not the creator of this dimension. He created this dimension, and then he created someone else named Satan, and then this Satan took over from him, and Satan's doing it, and so God's not actually committing these crimes himself. Okay, well, whatever the details are, that story doesn't make any sense. If you create something, someone that's on the level of a creator has far more responsibility than a human parent has, okay? And if your child, if you create a child that is a sociopath, even a human is expected to have some sort of responsibility for it, And so if you look at Christianity and how that pertains to this entity committing these crimes, that story about, oh, actually it's someone else committing these crimes, but they're doing it with God's permission. So this person committing these crimes says, oh, no, actually a really good person created this dimension, and he let me do it with his authority to commit these crimes. So it's basically a child molester trying to claim that what he's doing is justified. And so Another thing that they talk about, one of the central tenets of Christianity, is that Jesus died for our sins. And this is something that doesn't really make any sense. Okay, it's it's this concept like if you kill something because someone killed someone, that means other people are their crimes are already paid for. So it's like a blood sacrifice. Like it's not like you went out and you slayed a monster, or you carried out justice, or you killed some evil, terrible entity and saved other people, and so therefore you get rewarded for it, or something like that. It's just, oh, somebody died a long time ago. That means that everything I do is forgiven. It's justified. You know, it's already paid for, so I can do whatever I want, and then just say sorry, and then it's fine. Well. This brings up the concept of forgiveness itself, which is basically this idea of the Bible saying, if somebody wrongs you, you should let them wrong you more. You should turn your cheek so they can hit you in the face on the other side more easily. If they steal your tunic, you should give them your cloak too. So it's turned into this a child molester's wet dream. He says, yeah, you're supposed to help us fuck you over. You're supposed to help us do these terrible things to you. And so whatever this concept started as, whatever this religious belief started as, it has definitely been perverted over time. It's been perverted to this idea, well, if I forgive everyone that does anything wrong to me, then that means that I can do whatever I want to anyone else and I'm forgiven. And so this is a child molester's wet dream. Oh, I can go out and screw everyone over, but as long, people can screw me over if they can figure it out. It's a free for all. It's anarchy. It's everybody plundering everyone else's soul. And it's just not a thing that. It's just not a sensical argument. It's very nonsensical. And so again, I don't know if this was corrupted from some other idea, or if it was straight up fabricated in the state that it was in. But in the state that it is now is just not it's just not rightful, and it is used by somebody that is evil, that it wants to commit crimes in order to justify what he's doing, in order to continue committing these crimes. Christianity also has a factor of victim blaming. This whole concept of Adam and Eve. Well, somebody ate an apple 6,000 years ago. You son of a bitch. So that's why we're torturing you. So it's just not it's not a good story. It's not something that makes any sense. And it's victim blaming is one of the main techniques of a child molester. Child molesters love to use victim blaming. It's a disgusting and despicable thing. And the person that is conducting these crimes with this dimension is a disgusting and despicable entity. He has no right to exist and never will. And so it's important to point out the fact that you can see this reflected in Christianity. You can see this reflected in all the religions in the world. Hinduism is something that I also looked into. There were times in my life that were really difficult, and I really wanted to find the truth. I wanted to find out what the truth about existence was, And it's not something that I wasn't going about it because I, wanted to be seen as some kind of guru or something like that. I'm from Idaho. That is not a that would be looked at as so pompous to do something like that. That isn't in my nature at all. Even if I wasn't from Idaho, I'm sure it would just not be in my nature. And so I genuinely went out and put genuine effort into looking into Eastern religion, both Hinduism and Buddhism, but I'll cover Buddhism at the end. But Hinduism, for a long time, And I guess I was used to it because, from the time I was a kid and they told me these things about Jesus, there were things that just didn't make any sense, you know? And you had to like suspend your critical thinking skills. They were like, he died for my sins? What are you talking about? Like somebody ate an apple once? What? That doesn't. And so I guess I was kind of in the mindset that you just have to accept that with religion. And so the central tenet of Hinduism is one that I kind of ignored for a long time, or thought that maybe I just needed to think about it more. I needed to ponder it more. Maybe I didn't understand exactly what it was. And so I gave it years. At one point I was very into Eastern religion. I visited India 3 times. I spent a total of 6 months there. I went and listened to lectures of enlightened people, quote unquote enlightened people. I did spiritual practices. I did yoga all the time. I did fasting. I did chanting mantras. I prayed to different deities. I did different things. I did different things because I was genuinely motivated to find out what the truth is. And Christianity, I felt even at that time that it just had too many holes in it, for me to really believe in it. And Eastern religions seem to have some positive aspects, like they talked about karma rather than if you don't worship someone and accept somebody you don't even know as your savior, then that means you're going to burn in hell. So karma seemed like a better concept to me on the face value. At face value, it looked like something that made more sense to me. And so, as I progressed through this, and as I learned more and more about Hinduism and about Eastern religion in general, there are just some things that just wouldn't make sense. And it wouldn't. I just kept thinking, if I give it more time, if I give it more thought, if I think about it more or longer or this or that, then maybe it'll start to make sense to me, And there was a really terrible thing that happened to me, and I talked about it in the last video. I wanted to talk about my personal experiences so that people know where I'm coming from in these different ways, and the reason why I came to these conclusions, because these conclusions are based on actual experience, actual facts, not what somebody wrote in an old dusty manuscript 1,000 years ago or something like that. But actually, like what has happened to me really, not some concept about what this is, but what this actually is. And so, when I had this terrible experience, very horrific, nightmarish, traumatizing, I went back to India, and I went to Amma, and I went to Prem Baba, and I tried to see them in person, and I was prevented from doing that, and in retrospect now, I think that the reason for that is, well, about what I'm about to tell you, but I knew that I was jumping through all the hoops I was supposed to. I was chanting mantras, I was doing yoga, I was fasting, I was doing, at the time I was totally vegan, I was eating really well, I was doing all these things, and I was still suffering. I was still being made to suffer. I was being basically psychologically tortured. And I had terrible physical problems, my body ripping itself apart from some illness they think came from me being exposed to chemicals in Iraq. When I realized that I had jumped through all these hoops, that I had done all these things that I was supposed to do, and I was still suffering, I was still just being tortured, I started looking at this more critically. And I started, these things that didn't make sense to me, I started saying, okay, well, let's look at what this really is. What am I missing here? And what I finally came to realize, and it's kind of It's kind of ridiculous that it took me such a long time to realize this. One of the things that I realized that that I had totally blown off and totally just ignored or written off or just thought, maybe I just don't understand that. That couldn't be what it seems like at face value, you know. Well, I thought about it more and more. I thought about it longer, and the central tenet of Hinduism is this. It's basically that there's only one thing that has ever existed anywhere, okay? And this one thing that's ever existed anywhere decided to split itself into a bunch of different pieces and then put these different pieces through experiences so that it could learn what it is itself. Okay? Now this is an idea that seems to make sense on the surface, but if you dig into it, it's a half-baked idea. It's an idea that doesn't really answer some of the questions. Okay? First off, if you're creating somebody else and then you're torturing this entity horrifically like a sadistic, terrible bastard, you know, it doesn't really matter anything that is smart enough does not need to be tortured or torture anything else to learn something. If you need to, you're not smart enough to understand something just by looking at it and understanding how it works. Okay? Geniuses don't need to trap someone in a dungeon and torture them in order to become geniuses. They don't need to understand that in that way. You know, if you are really stupid and you can't just look at human behavior and understand what it is, then maybe you'd have to torture a human stuck in a hole. So this concept that in order to learn something that a greater entity, somebody with infinite intelligence, would have to torture little retards, little retarded entities that have been butchered out of their intelligence, their abilities, their intellect, that which they used to have. You know, it's a nonsensical argument. Why would looking at a worm help you understand what the sun is? You know, and first off, this is a nonsensical argument. Second off, the central tenet, and this is the main part. This is the main part of Hinduism that is a smoking gun, I think, is that Hinduism says the problem why you're suffering is because you are a separate person. And you should just get tortured to the point where you decide to die as a person already. And that's the problem. And they take this idea like if you don't want to do that, then you're arrogant. There's something wrong with you. They take this idea of personhood, of being a person, and they take this idea of arrogance, which are two totally different things. Okay? Arrogance and being a person, obviously two different things. You can be an arrogant person, sure, but those two concepts are totally different. These are different concepts. And they take the concept of ego. They take this word and say ego, and that means also, it means personhood and it means arrogance. So they're taking this concept and saying, oh, well, if you don't want to get tortured until you're dead, or if you want actual justice, if you don't want to be used and abused and tortured dead, then you're like arrogant. What's wrong with you? Can't you like sacrifice for the whole or something like this? This is the central tenet of Hinduism, you know, and this was something that I just didn't want to accept because obviously I don't want to die as a person, you know. And I think that that's one of the central characteristics of existence is, you know, if you are created as an entity, then, you know, you should be respected as an entity, your personhood. If you're not, then everyone who created you shouldn't have their personhood respected either. They should be tortured worse than dead. They should be tortured until they're worse than anything. This is the concept of karma also, which is also itself a a nonsensical concept, the more that you think about it. At first it kind of makes sense. If you do something wrong to someone, then something wrong should happen to you. Okay, what about the asshole that caused all the suffering? What about that entity that you claim is this all-powerful, all-knowing entity? He can just torture everybody and just not pay anything at all. But like you, somebody that's retarded and put at a disadvantage and stuck in a hole, you can be tortured for shit that you're caused to do? What? This is not justice, okay? Furthermore, it's nonsensical because it claims that if you suffer, if something bad happens to you, then, and I heard Prem Baba, I watched these words come out of Prem Baba's mouth. Okay, this person who was supposedly enlightened in India, in Rishikesh, I watched these words come out of his mouth. He said, almost verbatim, if karma finds you, if something terrible happens to you, it went to the right place. It found the right person. He basically was saying it's victim blaming. It's a form of victim blaming. He's saying if something bad happens to you, it's because you were a bastard. At some point, you just don't remember. That's the problem. It was some other time. You just don't remember. It's a ridiculous, disgusting excuse. It's an absolutely disgusting excuse. It's a child molester's masturbation fantasy to blame their victim for the crimes that they're committing against them. And furthermore, it doesn't make any sense. If I have something done bad to me, then that means I have it coming. And yet, so if I do something bad to someone else, then that doesn't mean that for them? Like, you're using me for justice, some kind of justice, by hurting someone else who deserves it, but then you're punishing me for it? It's not that I don't understand this concept, okay? I've thought about this concept for hours and hours and hours, for years. I've thought about this. I've looked at it from every single angle. I've been retired for 15 years. I have thought about nothing but existence itself and this existential situation for 15 years straight. Every single day, all day. This is what I've done. It is not possible that I do not understand the concept of karma. And anybody who says that is a liar. And somebody who's trying to justify this victim blaming, this child molester's characteristic that says, oh, well, you just don't understand how it works, and so therefore there's something wrong with you for saying that this victim blaming is wrong. It's another form of victim blaming. It's victim blaming for those who point out that it's victim blaming. And so Hinduism completely disrespects your personhood. They don't care if you're a person at all. And, this is, if you look at this in context, this dimension is created by somebody doing terrible things to people. Horrible suffering. Existential crimes. That's what's been done to me. I don't know if they've surrounded me with a bunch of puppets that don't have any kind of sense. That sounds like the kind of cowardice that the creator of this dimension would be engaged in. To try to pretend that I'm something else, that I'm someone else, that I'm something else. It's Hinduism has a lot of holes itself, but those are definitely the central tenets. Even though it has a bunch of different branches and it has a bunch of different deities and they believe different things and it's kind of a loose grouping of beliefs, those are the central tenets of Hinduism. Okay, and the holes in those stories are big enough to drive a semi-truck through. It's just wrong. It's okay to admit when existential crimes have been committed. And Hinduism and Christianity and the other religions, this is what they attempt to do. And I'll go a little bit more about that later. But now Islam I don't have a lot of experience with. I have gone to Islamic church once, ironically while I was in basic training. Because if you didn't go to church on Sundays, then they would make you work. They'd make you sweep and mop and do all this menial labor, and so I would go to different church meetings. Um, so I went to Islamic church and I listened to it a little bit. And that was my first exposure to it. This was before 9/11. And so it was not, I had no preconceived notions about Islam at all. I had no, there was none of the fear mongering and the terrorism and the all this or that or whatever. And so that was my first exposure to it, and I liked those guys. I can't remember. I think it was because they gave us candy. I think it was those guys that gave us candy, and so generally I actually had a very positive experience with them. But I have looked into Islam a little bit. When I was, especially when I was suffering, I looked into all kinds of different religions. And I looked into this and that. But I always kind of knew that Islam is based on a kind of a similar structure as Christianity, and it's basically like God created this deal, and He's an all-merciful God, but if you don't worship Him and go through these things, then you're going to burn in hell forever. Okay, and so this is the kind of I know there's lots of differences. I'm not trying to say they're the same thing, but I am saying that it had the same structure, and so I kind of concentrated more on other religions, and so. But this is something to look at it in particular. If you look at this in the context of someone is using this dimension to commit existential crimes, and they are. It's someone with consciousness. It is someone with intelligence. They are definitely committing existential crimes in this dimension, with this dimension. If you look at it in this context, and you look at Islam, again, I don't know how it started out. I don't know how this belief system started, but it does appear to be perverted, just like Christianity does, into a state that is that's corrupted. And this idea is, they used to have this belief that everything is already controlled and decided and fated, and that there's nothing you can do to change any of it. And there was kind of a backlash because people are like, well, if everything's already decided and everything, so He's just decided I'm going to burn in hell? And I have no say in it? What? And so then they kind of changed it. The scholars went back and said, oh, no, actually, it's He already knows what's going to happen. And so that might seem like it makes sense to some people, but if you dig it a little bit deeper, it really doesn't. It doesn't make any sense at all. The fact that He knows that this is going to happen, but he's going to force you to be tortured for it anyway. It's like He's caused this. He's brought all this about. And so let's say that you build a wood chipper, okay? You know how it works. You know what powers it. You know what it does to all kinds of different things. Okay, you know what it does to wood. You know what it does to rock. You know what it does to flesh. You know what it does to all these different things. Okay, you built it. You know exactly what it does. You built it specifically to do what it's doing. Okay, and then you take a puppy and you hold it over the wood chipper and you say, I already know what's going to happen, and you drop it in there, and then you go, you puppy, you should burn in hell forever. This is a sociopathic and terrible thing to do. But in this particular case, Allah, He created both the puppy and the wood chipper. He knew exactly what both of these two things did. He decided that they would do these two things. He chose for these two things to do this. And He put this puppy in this wood chipper, and tries to blame the puppy for what is being done. Again, this is victim blaming. This is somebody obviously making terrible things take place to an innocent, and then trying to say that it's justified or whatever, for whatever reason. It's a form of victim blaming. And so I'm sure there's other things about Islam to think about, and I'm sure that there's other examples of how Islam is used to by the person that's committing these crimes in this dimension, And again, I don't know how it started. Maybe it started as an honest and absolutely truthful and logical explanation of what's being done here. But it appears that if it did start as that, it was corrupted over time. And so, the last one, the fourth biggest religion in the world is Buddhism, and this one's a little bit harder to address because there's different sects of Buddhism. There's different branches, and there's some of them that believe in different kinds of dogmas. Some believe in dogmas that are different from the other branches.